This film shows a conversation that I had a few days ago with two former colleagues, and we discussed each other's perspectives on the COVID-19 crisis. This was a conversation that I'd set up as part of what I hope will be a series of videoed conversations. I'm also going to put the audio up for those who prefer the sort of podcast approach. I was interested to hear from other people about their experience. I'm one of those people who's sitting in a house on their own and communicating with the outside world through technology, and hearing about the similar situations that we're in, but also recognising that we're all in quite different situations. And this is layered on top of my concern about international inequality, but also about trying to act together as one for justice for all of us, and also to protect us from the risks that we face in our environment. So I've started with this conversation. I hope you'll find it interesting. It was great, really, because people talked without prompting from me about different issues of justice and different possibilities for change. So I hope you'll find it enjoyable. If you're interested in taking part in one of these conversations in future, please do contact me. There'll be another one go online in the next few days, and I'm hoping to arrange more conversations as time goes on. The first thing that I asked the two people that I talked to was to introduce themselves and to say something about their perspective.
Bikie Isharaza. I'm Ugandan, British Ugandan. I'm currently working in Liberia. I'm on a youth program around entrepreneurship and employment. And yeah, that's me really. And I was caught up, actually quite interestingly, I was caught up, I had a lockdown here the night before I was supposed to catch my flight back to Uganda. So I was properly locked down on it. The rules are that actually it was declared on the 10th of April. It was a 90-day state of emergency that was declared. Before that, we had 3 weeks of, basically curfew. And at the moment, we're being told we have to stay out of the streets and go out maximum 1 hour, only for essential stuff. But then people are moving around, and shops are closed at 3 p.m. and opened at 6, closed at 3 p.m. Only essential shops. Everything else is closed. You have the telecoms, obviously banks and things as are open, but everything else is shut down. The government has sent home all non-essential staff, which basically means security and health workers are considered essential, as well as some of the regulatory heads, but everyone else is basically sent on leave.
So, what does it mean in terms of the impact on you right now?
So the impact on me personally is that I can't get to meet my team. The models that we built in terms of the way we engage young people here is that you meet them, you interact with them, you build some peer support amongst them, but that isn't possible. So that is the impact on me professionally. Personally, it just means that I was unable to travel home. My family is out in Uganda. I'm in Liberia. There's I have 3 kids, yeah, and they're all at school at the moment. So it means my wife who's working at home with 3 kids, and they're doing like online studies and things like that, but they need to stay engaged. So it just means I'm really unable to help, feel really not very useful actually. And also just obviously the constant worry about about what's, you know, what's going on, what could go on, and things like that. But they, fortunately, they've been, you know, we've been fortunate to have, you know, a place they can stay in, and there's a big garden they can go out and play. But it's still a lot of, you know, hard work there that I can't really do much about. I have to do more exercising indoors than outdoors. I had taken to playing tennis, so you know, I do have one, you know, a couple of sessions with a coach who is around here. Like, you know, this morning I did, you know, I played a game of tennis, so that kind of keeps me sane. Um, but it's also been a, you know, a really good experience in terms of learning about individuals, about their personal experiences, about what's going on. I mean, you get to know that somebody has, you know, 2 kids, 3 kids. You don't normally ask that at work, you know. You get to hear about what people are going through. We had some colleagues who have lost some relatives. You know, you get to hear about, you know, not just close relatives, but, you know, people in moments like this, you kind of get to know people a bit more, and they get to know you also a bit more on a more personal level, because, you know, you kind of feel you're all in this together. So that has been something I've found quite interesting, in terms of how it has affected me. Yeah.
Thank you. And Geoff, could you introduce yourself and tell us something about your experience of what's been happening?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name's Geoff. Live in the UK. Where at the moment we're up at a house in Lancashire. When we lived in Spain for a couple of years, when we came back, the idea was to do a bit of a house renovation, which we've completed, but now we can't move. So, but we're, in many respects, my wife and I feel very fortunate in that we've got a nice house with a garden, and the weather's been exceptionally good. So, from a personal point of view, we're in the kind of a sheltered category, being in the older age group. But we're allowed to go out for walks, and we get most of the groceries delivered. And also, similarly to what Bikie was saying, I'm doing a lot of exercise at home, just doing a bit of Tai Chi and that sort of stuff at home. And I'm doing a few online lessons of Tai Chi for my grandchildren, which I think they're enjoying, I'm not sure. Going out for walks with the dog and so on. And then I think that I was thinking, had this occurred 20 years ago, it would have been so much worse, I think, for all of us, because it means that I can pursue professional activities online. I've been going to a number of webinars. I'm doing a lot of reading online. I'm continuing to develop my Spanish language knowledge online and all that sort of thing. And I think had it been 20 years ago, it would have been very, very different. So from a personal point of view, you know, we're able to pursue intellectual and physical activities at home. Feel frustrated because we've got grandchildren, and they're in different parts of the country. We've got 7 grandchildren altogether, and we can't see them. We have these sort of discussions with them on Zooms and FaceTime and so on, but you can't give them a hug, and it's very frustrating in that respect. And we feel we don't know when we're going to be able to see them again. And I think one of the factors that I'm beginning to feel personally now is the uncertainty. There is, I don't know if it's the same in Liberia, Bikie, but certainly here, there's some discussion now about, you know, what's the exit strategy, when's the end game, when are we going to get out of this? I personally think the answer is that we don't know, and the scientists don't know, the medics don't know, and I think that uncertainty is very difficult, and I'm concerned that if this carries on into the winter, things will be very different. I think the social implications could be different. We could have people not cooperating. I have found, same as you, people have been very community orientated. People have helped out. I've bought stuff for people. Other people in the local community have helped out older people and so on. And there's a lot of compliance really with the rules, but I am concerned that if this carries on indefinitely, that may no longer be the case, and there could be some sort of social disruption as a result. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, thank you, Geoff. Thanks for, I like the fact you're both still exercising. I started off kind of, because I used to do quite a lot of weight training, and so I thought, oh, how am I going to continue my immense musculature, which I'm sure you're sensing, it's all hidden, baggy clothes, you know. And then I kind of stopped about 10 days ago and just wanted to relax. And so, thanks for the introductions. I think I'd like to ask you, if I can, to give a sort of short view of perhaps why you've been motivated to say yes to join this discussion, and what your thoughts are about how did this happen, or what's an important perspective on this event, whether it's the event that you're experiencing, or whether it's sort of the wider sort of social event. Would you like to go first, Bikie, in that order?
No worries, yeah. So, I mean, it's quite a broad question, but in terms of, journey, when we were working at Skillshare, remember how we used to talk a lot about and practice a lot about global citizenship and our responsibilities as individuals, organizations, but also, as entities on this earth, the one earth that we've got. And what I find the reason why I actually joined this was, when you share that video and you talked about global citizenship, and I started thinking about, some of the principles behind global citizenship and what we are meant to be, how we're meant to be responsible to everyone globally, obviously. And yet, looking at how everything was panning out across the globe, given the divides that were going on, and the tendency of nationalistic tendencies that are coming up, across, everywhere. It's not just in the West. It's like, it's something that everyone seems to be scrambling to be more and more nationalistic. That got me thinking and challenged my thinking as to, was this something? Was it just this global citizenship thing? Was it real? Do people think like that? Okay. Because we're facing a global pandemic. It's not a local pandemic. It's global. But are we thinking globally? And I felt, no, we're not. We're still veering towards the more national boundaries, and we're talking about lockdowns. That's the normal now. Seems to be the normal.
Okay, let's hold that thought. Hold that thought. Thanks, Bikie. Geoff.
Okay, so thanks, Bikie. That's very interesting. I think there's been a bit of a kind of reversal of status, in that I speak as a football fan. That the people in society who earned a lot of money, like footballers and the celebs, it's now been totally reversed. They're not. We realise they're not important. That they really aren't. And the people who are important are the carers, the cleaners, the delivery drivers, and they're the people who are being raised in status. It's almost like complete reversal. We can live without footballers and celebs, but we can't live without the NHS workers, and not just obviously the doctors and nurses, but also people with lower status who until now have had lower status in society, like cleaners and home carers. And I think we're all coming to realization that these people are actually really, really important, and shouldn't be patronized, but should be recognized for what they are. They're the people making a big contribution to society. So I hope that maybe when we emerge from this, that will remain the case, but we shall see.
Yeah, I'll give you my minute. Thanks, Geoff. This is working, isn't it? This conversation's working. My perspective that I've been working on and thinking about is the cosmological perspective, for want of many better words. If I'm critical of the way national politics is structured and international politics is structured, and I sort of look at the way people talk about the world as a universal and in quite woolly terms, yes, it's sort of always a sort of, the world is a place of dreams and sort of socially constructed rather than limited and particular. I'm interested in saying, well, hang on, I'm a being on a big rock with a bunch of other beings, and it's got names, and there are social practices and things that that I can choose to comply with or not, but that seem to shape my existence. And as a being, first of all, you know, like a screaming child born into this world and still wondering what it's all about, you know, what's the sort of society I want that's going to sustain my future and that of the people that I have relationships with. That's where I'm sort of starting from, I think. Can we go around again, and then we'll open up the conversation a bit more?
So when it comes to global citizenship, like, I've just been looking around, and I'm living right now in a country that's the fourth poorest country in the world. That's Liberia. And it is a country that, the levels of poverty here are nothing I've experienced before, and don't get me wrong, there's poverty in very many places I've been to, but it is, it is serious here, in the sense that, the economy is extremely fragile and weak. There's a lot of divisions within, the community here, but yet this is one of the most, the longest, one of the countries that has had the longest independence in Africa. Jenny, I don't know whether you're going to ask us about books and stuff, and what we think, but this is a country that was founded by the US, basically, in Africa. It's very unique in that sense, and has a very special relationship with the US, compared to any other country, possibly in the world, actually. However, I look around and I see, and I don't know the figures exactly, but we don't have a single ICU unit here. The isolation center is a 90-bed capacity with 40 beds. Okay. Today I got yesterday I got a message from our, task force, and somebody was saying how one of the county leaders, in the Southwest or somewhere like that, had been tested to have, COVID, but he was told, oh no, just stay home because there's no isolation unit here. Mm-hmm. And so you see, when we talk about global citizenship and global responsibilities, you have a country that has one of the, it's one of the most closest relationship you have. I mean, Liberians, half of Liberians are Americans, they've got dual citizenship, or at least, residential status. And yet at the same time, it's one of the countries with one of the weakest health systems in the world. So, with the relationship with a country with one of the most powerful systems in the world and resources. So, when you talk about responsibility and global citizenship, and what I feel, it's extremely disheartening. You watch TV, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff that the US needs to sort out in terms of what they call, ventilators and and things like that. But at the same time, are they looking around? What happens when, after the curve has been flattened in the US, and some citizens here decide to travel? What happens? Do they have a responsibility like that? So I feel, I'm just speaking in terms of this dual relationship, but it cuts across, over time. Like, I don't think there's a recognition across some of the most powerful leaders and economies. And this is not a thing for you to focus internally. It's actually something that you need to look more globally. We need to be focusing on what kind of health systems and what kind of supply chains would work in terms of getting, equipment out there. Interestingly, in all of this chaos, China has come out to be supplying a lot of this equipment, across most of sub-Saharan Africa. I know, for example, in Uganda, they received about 30,000 test kits from China. they've received PPE materials from China as donations. Nobody's even talking about them. They're not trying to talk about it. While, you know, in some of the traditional kind of countries that have been offering this kind of support are very quiet. And don't get me wrong, they have issues to deal with, but, you know, how are we working globally to actually respond to this, you know? And I feel it's not working. It really isn't. And if another wave comes, we'll even be more closed. That's my worry.
Yeah.
So that is
okay.
What I think.
Thank you. We will expand on that. I wanted to make sure that we go around to those. Geoff, do you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks. I think Bikie talking about global citizenship made me think about globalization, and has been discussed before. But I think, however this virus started, that's not entirely clear at the moment, it certainly was spread by travel. And I think you know, the prevalence of air travel, people traveling all over the world, spread like mad. I mean, the classic example was that probably the person who brought it to England was a businessman from Sussex who went to a business trip to Singapore and then on a skiing trip in the Italian Alps, and then I think he went to France and then came back to the UK. And I think, you know, these things spread enormously due to modern travel. And that's all stopped. The skies are clear. There's less pollution because airplanes aren't working anymore. And I think that the days of mass air travel are probably going to go. You know, people think nothing or thought nothing of hopping on a plane to go to Croatia for a stag weekend or whatever. And they're just places where viruses can develop. Similarly with cruise ships, they're kind of floating petri dishes. So I think globalization in terms of travel will reduce. But I also agree with you, the problem has been that there's been individual responses. Each country seems to have responded differently. And when they say they're following the science, they seem to be following different science from different experts. And I think it's very confusing for those of us who are in the general public. That different countries have locked down much earlier, different countries have responded differently, have different responses, and now they're coming out differently. And it's going to take a huge study to see the impact of all that over a long period of time. I'll just give you two extreme examples, which I heard this morning on the radio. One is Sweden has very little social distancing or lockdown, and we don't know what the long-term impact of that will be. Vietnam responded very, very quickly, had a lockdown very early on, in January, in fact, and now the incidence of the virus is very low. So I agree with you, Bikie. I think we should be thinking much more globally, but in the meantime, we need to look at the different reactions, see what happened, because countries responded differently.
Thanks, Geoff. Yeah. So, I mean, the sort of issue there you raise about travel and globalization is one that interests me, and also fundamentally the politics that recognizes that we're all of equal value as human beings, and that comes before you know, valuing our nationality. You know, I want a politics that addresses the inequality between Liberia and the United States. And, you know, I mean, it really speaks volumes actually as a critique of the state, doesn't it? That you know, that half of Liberians can also be American citizens, and yet not benefit from the sorts of healthcare that is available to other American citizens. Although it sort of demonstrates this issue of methodological nationalism in our thinking that I talked about in my vlog video. That's really prevalent. You know, so we sort of, perhaps because it's the only thing available to us, we seek to sort of make comparisons and assess how things are doing based on national statistics and national framing. You know, so how does America compare to the UK, or how does Sweden compare to China, and how does Liberia compare to the United States? You know, we need ways to analyze the thing, and it also sort of supports position in terms of being able to sort of shape demands and say, well, you know, as a British person, I need to be doing at least as well as a Ugandan person or as a Chinese person, you know, or whatever it is. But actually, the American, there's an interesting thing in an Economist video out a few days ago from driven by the Economist's American correspondent, pointing out that actually America is a federal state, and that there are different public health regimes in the different states that make up the United States, with really significant implications. You know, so we, you know, that's just, you know, I don't really want to get into that, but you know, I think there's a problem with the state, the idea of a state in general. From my perspective, you know, we might, one of the problems of that sort of methodology of like analyzing things state by state is, well, that doesn't necessarily do anything to help the people who are excluded and marginalized within the state, who were ignored, not seen within the state, you know, whether that's older people who are vulnerable, people with other, you know, health conditions that make them more vulnerable, people affected by poverty or by their ethnic group, nationality. Thanks. I think we've started to surface some issues. Yes, I did say to you, could you bring sort of as an object or highlight an object that, or an idea or an image that sort of symbolizes where you're at? And did you pick up on that, Bikie? Did you see? Because you mentioned, I was going to mention books, and Geoff, you sent me a picture. I'll show it on screen in a minute. Right. Bikie, what was your object? What did you think?
Can you read that? Oh,
yes, Liberia and the United States during the Cold War. Limits of reciprocity. Did you write it? Oh no. Well done. I bet you could have done. Well, tell us about it.
So, I mean, I haven't finished reading it, but I got introduced to this by one of the French diplomats in Liberia, who I was paying a courtesy call on them, and they, you know, they basically, you know, we're talking about the history of Liberia and things, and he said, you know, you need to look at this book. It talks a lot about, you know, some of the key things about the history and the politics or the political economy of the country at the time. So it kind of talks about the history of the country. It talks about, you know, how, you know, in principle, certain elements that were about, they had mutual interests, you know, both the US and Liberia. But it also talks quite a bit about, you know, global capital and multinational companies in there. And that is what I find very interesting right now about it, because at moments like this, you know, over the years, we've had, obviously, you know, an explosion of companies that you know, have all this, the kind of resources that really, you know, are mind-boggling, you know, and thinking about what their role is.
Oh, we've lost your volume.
Sorry.
There you are. You're there.
Okay.
Yeah. So thinking about, you know, the role of global capital and multinational companies in a context like this is quite interesting, because you have a good number of companies that, for example, the US has decided to what do you call it? There's the act that they keep talking about, but where you know, a company that is based in the US and has the ability to produce certain materials that are necessary for the country, you kind of you know, they're kind of forced to do it. So you know, you'll have I'm sure pharmaceutical companies there. I don't know, I can't quote anything, but I'm sure you'll have pharmaceutical companies in there. You'll have companies that are able to produce, you know, ventilators and things like that, where they could have, for example, shifted their goods to other markets, but they've been tied down by, you know, by again this nationalistic tendency, and they can't stand up to the country because, you know, to the government, because tomorrow they might be coming in and you know, well, anyway, it's rather complicated for them. But, you know, living in a world where you feel like, you know, where capitalism has been presented as something where, you know, there's a free flow of capital and goods and services across the globe, suddenly what we're seeing is that it's no longer as it was being presented. It actually is now about who is more powerful and who is going to, you know, it's more of a cowboyish. I'm sorry to use those words, but it's about actually controlling a lot of the capital more internally and excluding certain areas. Which means, you know, even if you're in Liberia today and you wanted to order a ventilator, you're not likely to get it, because, you know, orders have already been taken, or certain acts of parliament have determined that certain companies cannot supply you even if they wanted to. So I feel like the whole concept of you know, globalization and I mean global capital and multinational companies has been challenged, in the sense that they can't claim to be working in the interest of everyone.
Yeah.
They are actually working in specific interests, and they can't run away from that anymore, you know.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
The UK Health Secretary of State the other day trumpeted the UK beginning to do human trials and a vaccine for COVID-19, and he said something along the lines of the numerous advantages to the UK being at the forefront of developing a vaccine are too good to ignore. Well, maybe he just meant that wouldn't it be great if there are no impediment to having vaccine for our citizens? But I suspect he also meant, wouldn't it be great if we were a leader in that market?
Yes.
You know, and we were able to take competitive advantage from being the one who had the hands on the drugs, you know, and this is the way global capital works, isn't it? And it works in concert with the sort of nation state system, in my view.
But what is interesting, sorry to just point out, and I add something here, is I was also reading about Denmark that you know, stated that they're not offering state aid to companies who are not, you know, who are not paying taxes internally. So, you know, so that was brilliant, I thought, because, you know, you're using taxpayers' money for anyway. It's a slightly related topic, but, you know, I thought that was actually really good, because, you know, it's about taxpayers bailing you out. So you're using taxpayers' money, but you don't want to pay your taxes locally. So they took a stand, which I feel was actually really good.
Okay, yeah.
In that sense, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I think I am. You know, I talk about I criticize the state, the nation state, as an idea. You know, that largely sort of structures inequality around the world and the vulnerability of people who happen to be born in different places. But also, it works sometimes as a force for good in a sort of you know, in those sort of international relationships and the relationship with capital. Geoff, you let me share what you sent to me, unless you've got a picture of that particular thing on the wall. Is it your personal copy of?
Yeah, I'll explain it. Well, you were talking about cosmology, Johnny,
yes.
And it's a painting of which actually we bought in Israel. It's in English it's Genesis, but in Hebrew it's Bereshit, the beginning. It's like the Big Bang. Let me see if this works. I could show you.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Oh wow!
Oh yeah, brilliant. Yes, that's far better than using the technology.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, shall I leave it there for a minute and then I'll take you through it?
Okay.
Really, it is the Big Bang, and what you have in red there, that's Aleph. That's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's the beginning. This is the cosmological It really is the beginning of space and time. That's how I interpret it anyway. It's a
Right.
very
Yeah.
complex and beautiful work. And it seems to me that this is very appropriate at the moment.
Sorry, Geoff, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Yeah, that's better now.
Okay.
You sounded a bit distant.
Oh, sorry.
It's a very long way away, Bikie.
It's the beginning of something new. Can you see that okay?
Yes, thank you, yeah.
So it's quite an interesting painting, which we've taken to different places. And there's all sort of, in fact, what you see up there in the blue background, that's the other letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's sort of like the beginning of it's quite mystical. I'll come back now. And it seemed to me, without being, I'm not a religious person, but I think in terms of, it does seem as if we're into a new era and beginning of something different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, possibly. Yeah. It's interesting. In the, when I first sort of in a quite a panicky situation decided to well, my doctor instructed me to self-isolate. And then said, well, you need to, well, I got the message he was saying you need to do 12 weeks of self-isolation, which is at one point the UK government was saying is what people more vulnerable should do. And I thought, whoa, what world am I going to be born into, in 12 weeks, and thinking that UK society would be extremely vulnerable. And also thinking, well, we'll find out what it is to live in a way that actually lots of people around the world are pretty used to living in a sort of precarious situation. One of the things that one of the government people said quite early on was, well, it will take six months to get back to normal. And when I first, well, of course, the new normal will not be the same as the old normal. But that sort of rhetoric, the rhetoric that says it's okay, we're back to normal, is a really powerful one. And what the sort of system will try to do will be to return us to the normal that works for the system of the modern state, and I read, in speaking to what you were saying, Bikie, I had a look, the Tony Blair Institute or Foundation have been working on this stuff from a UK perspective. I think they tend to try to say that they have a sort of humanitarian value system, but they've written a report on what people should do to ease its lockdown in the coming months, and front and center in that report is gross domestic product, GDP. It's basically, let's get the economy back on track because that's what makes this thing work. And there's nothing really that says, although maybe we should take account of that people are learning right now that they don't necessarily need all this stuff which drives a rich economy like the British economy, but which also drives climate change and inequality on a global basis. And people are recognizing, and people are going, well, it's not actually the end of the world that I can't get a new outfit. I mean, fast fashion and all of that, it doesn't matter. This is the news. It doesn't matter. And it contributes to major problems in terms of poverty and inequality and climate risk, and environmental risk. So that's not there in the report that says this is how we get back to normal and everybody can be comfortable again,
But sorry, can I just jump in on that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Just to say that, Geoff, at the beginning you talked about, how, our, what we're calling celebrities have been turned, upside down basically. And we now recognize, people that actually matter. I do wonder though, what will society actually look and consider as, celebrities? Who will be a celebrity in the future? will we continue to recognize and say, you know, somebody who's, you know, spent a couple of days or a week on an island becomes a celebrity? Or will we start recognizing, you know, the bin man who comes in, you know, every week or every other day to you know, or the postman who's always made sure that you stay connected. And so I wonder whether we're seeing these things and actually internalizing them, and whether, you know, our so-called socialites will not have as much of the influence that they have, or they've had over years. I mean, who goes on, you know, on Instagram now to look for pictures of the latest whatever fashion? Does it even matter at the moment?
Interesting
We're kind
point.
of, yeah. So
Can I just?
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when you said about celebrities, it's quite interesting. You may not have read there, but here the press has created a new celebrity who was a 99-year-old man, ex-army captain, who walked around his garden to raise money for the National Health Service. And he wanted to raise £1,000 before his 100th birthday, which is great, fantastic, commendable. But he raised something like 5 million. I've forgotten how many million he's now raised. And now he's become the new celebrity. Now it's great, but it's, I don't know, I find it a wee bit patronizing, but there's now a big petition for him to become a knight, you know, to become Sir, got his name, and Sir Captain, whatever his name is. So at the moment, he's a temporary celebrity. But I wonder, you know, oh, sorry, there's somebody at the door. The dog is telling me. I'll see if Lorna can go. Who's going to be the new celebrity? Yeah, it's interesting.
We'll have to sort of round up in a few minutes, but I think what I'll ask Geoff and yourself something about what this means for youth, because it's something that connects you both. And obviously, you both were young people once, a long time ago.
Sorry about that.
But it's sort of, I want to link through just to sort of, as we round up, to youth, but I think there's a link in terms of this idea about justice, and the way that the state and this current system will try to reshape things, in the idea of survivor bias. You know, survivor bias is the idea that you know, that I suppose that history is written by the winners. And then that works in so many different ways, and the people in charge get to, you know, are the ones who survived, you know, the sort of the competitive nature of life, and you know, and quite literally survived, where others have died. And that's the case, likely the case in something like a pandemic, you know, that when we say we're back to normal, but it will be normal for a new population, which is not the same as the previous population. So political decisions are being made that choose between who lives and dies. But also, you know, let's link it to the youth thing. Something extraordinary about this event, perhaps, is this idea that the impact on the younger generations and coming generations is, at least for this health crisis, less and possibly negligible in terms of personal impacts, you know, and personal risk to their health. I wonder what it means, though. I wonder what thoughts you might have had about, you know, the sort of future for young people, and maybe what their political responsibility is, or their political opportunity. What do you think?
Okay, so I mean, there's a couple of things that I've been thinking about here, and one of them is that, which is quite obvious, you know, a lot of governments are taking on huge debt. Okay, so they're borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, or using up whatever reserves they can to obviously respond to the need for capital and resources, and the healthcare system, and whatever it is that, you know, needs to be done in each of the countries. this money is not free, and generally, and so for young people, the first thing that comes to mind is there's going to be a whole generation of people that have to pay back globally. The economy, the global economy is slowing down, and has slowed down for sure. We're likely to have, less jobs, more people, obviously in situations where there's, they need to survive. And, you'll find that young people, again, are more vulnerable, especially young women, so so I see like that as the implications on them. They're not health-wise, they are the least impacted upon. But if you're looking at the long term, in terms of opportunity and also the general political economy, they will be impacted on for quite a while to come. But there's a side to this that I believe will work quite well, for young people, which is that, the new normal, as we are talking about it, is that technology has a big role to play. And, we see that, social media and, and interactions amongst young people have been changed compared to, I think the way we would have socially interacted. People are, on all these different mediums that they use to, or media that they use to engage and interact amongst themselves. So a lockdown per se, a lot of people value, and most people value the face-to-face interaction, and that will never change, I think. But at the same time, for many young people, I think having the interaction that they've always had, mainly in terms of technology, is a positive thing. But it obviously means it's only for those who have access to it. If I'm in a place like this, so that is one one positive thing. The other thing is, again, related to that is technology will always or innovations around technology that enable or or cut through some of the challenges that we are facing, something that I think young people are always going to buy into. And I think that is something, again, that works positively towards the future for young people. So, for example, and one of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment is to run a digital hackathon, to try and get young people across here on to try and think remotely on finding solutions that can help them, but also thinking about how do we get messages across to young people about staying healthy but also productive and things like that. And it is very likely that that is going to be, if we are able to save and reach more effectively, I think it's teaching us to think differently, because normal is never going to be back. We'll have to work differently, and I think that for me, for young people, I see that as a positive side in relation to them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bikie.
I could go on and on, but
well, I mean, you're welcome to another time. We can, we can do this again. It'd be great to catch up again. Geoff, what did you?
Honestly, thank you, Bikie. I can't add anything to what you said. I think you've really covered it perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say in terms of summing up? I mean, I've really taken from this like a sense of that there are issues of justice to share, the old issue that we know about, Bikie, that is as stark as ever and as unjust as ever in terms of global inequality. Was there anything that you wanted to add before we wind up? Either of you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, global inequality is always, it's obviously the reason I'm in this business, but I think this pandemic has thrown open wide the obvious inequalities that exist across different nations. But I'll tell you, there's certain positives here, right? If you think about countries like Vietnam or Uganda, for example, Uganda has had, about 50% recovery rates. They've had 66 cases for over, a six-week period. They've managed to do a lot of, contact tracing and managing. They've not had a single death, internally. So there are countries that are doing an amazing job that don't necessarily have the resources that we think they have. And I was talking to one of my school friends who's on the task force that's managing this pandemic, and he said actually the biggest reason for success has been that the community are able to to support the process, and they're able to let the task force know that we have a case here and things like that. So it's something, I don't know whether it's something to from others to learn about, but the thought that knowledge sits in one place, or positive experiences exist in only one place, I think has been thrown open. Whereas because the health systems of countries that have the best health systems across the globe are the ones that are struggling the most at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenon that we don't really understand why.
Yeah.
Even in Liberia, or other countries in Africa, it's a very interesting phenomenon. So while those inequalities exist, I don't know whether we will come out of this and rethink, some of what we hold true, or what we thought we hold true, and value others
Yeah.
differently.
That sounds really valuable thought. Jeff, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, thanks very much. It's been very, very interesting listening to you. And I think it has also thrown up issues of, as I've said, of inequalities within societies as well as between countries. And I think things won't be the same. So no, I can't really add any more than that.
No, but I think you made that point really early on, and we've sort of talked about the international issues perhaps more than we should have done. But that point that you made about recognition of people who are actually working, who are being the community, while there's this sort of shadow community behind closed doors, are the people that if we conclude that we need to keep this sort of system of nation states, and run things that way, or these are the people that make the thing work. And it doesn't actually ties in really neatly to Bikie's point, about where knowledge lies, and that this is what people respond to. I think from the UK perspective, there's a far more positive response to the people who are helping us, than those who are sort of fudging decisions, and wearing sharp suits and earning the big bucks.
It's also made me think
vulnerable.
that people used to joke that the only thing that will actually unite humanity and make us realize that we're all the same and we're all in this together would be an invasion from an alien planet, and then maybe only then would humanity unite. And now this is an invisible alien, as it were, an invisible enemy which is affecting all of humanity. And my hope is that make us realize that we need to unite more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But that links to my thing about the cosmos, that actually I'm a citizen of the cosmos, and it doesn't stop. There isn't like some sort of, it looks like a barrier, that sky up there, but it is no barrier. Nature's all one, and it goes out from the earth as much as remains within it. Thanks both of you for your time. It's been such a treat, really great, and great to see you guys.
You too.
Yeah, thank you, really. And
you're both very welcome to join my Tai Chi classes if you like.
Oh, really? Okay. You could be the new. There's a thing. Actually, that's perfect, isn't it? Because in the UK, Bikie, maybe he's getting people from around the world. There's this guy called Joe something or other, and he does a PE class for kids on YouTube first thing in the morning, and he's been having nearly 1 million people following his live broadcast.
Wow.
So we've got PE with Joe is the name of the thing. How about Tai Chi with Geoff? Tai Chi with Geoff.
You're very
PE.
welcome.
Come on.
Sounds good.
I'll send you the link. Okay.
Thank you, guys. I'm going
No,
to
thank you too.
share this recording in the next few days, and there'll be another one of these group discussions on Sunday morning. So hopefully you'll have a chance to see that and see whether they agree with you or not. And then hopefully more after that, because I've enjoyed it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well,
Yeah.
let me just say, it's nice to see you again, Johnny. Nice to meet you, Bikie. Hopefully we'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
Thanks,
Yeah, you
guys.
too. Take care.
Yeah. Have a good day.